Return of the Obra Dinn is a game I never intended to play. I figured, much like Breath of the Wild and Terraria, that I was simply too late to the party and I wouldn't find any interest in the game. Well, two things changed that. A Steam sale and a trailer that took a violin and church bells to make a fantastic song that was stuck in my head way longer than it should have been. Lucas Pope has made a pirate game where you play the exact opposite of that, an insurance agent from the 1800s, and yet also found a way to keep me hooked for the week that I spent playing it. Your job is to inspect a ship called the Obra Dinn, a merchant ship that left 5 years ago with about 60 crew members, and came back with none. The ship has taken serious damage, and there are a few bones lying around, but there's no complete story on the ship. No documents, no writing, and no living souls to speak of. Fortunately, the man who assigned you to inspect the Obra Dinn has given you a book with the names, roles, country of origin, and an image of all 60 crew members on board, as well as this pocket watch called Memento Mortem, or Remember Death in Latin. I didn't use Google Translate to find that out. I took 2 years of Latin and that's all I've really got to show for it, so yeah. When you walk over to a pile of bones, it allows you to do this.
Captain! Open the door! Kick it in. Lest we break it down and take more than those shells!
And then...
You bastards may take exactly what I give you!
We're taken to the exact moment in which the person died. We can walk around the area and see who was present and what others nearby were doing at the time. After a moment, we're then asked two basic questions. Who are they, and what is their fate? Fates are pretty easy, since you only have a select few to choose from, and none are all that ambiguous. However, some come with a follow-up question. If they were shot, then by who? If they were crushed, then by what? And so on and so forth. The game lets you know who you've gotten right in sets of 3, and then turns the scribbled writing into print. Now, one thing that makes Return of the Obra Dinn special is that it can really only be experienced once, since it is a mystery game, albeit a very large and complicated one. So if you want my advice, you should watch the trailer and then decide to either buy the game or keep watching this review. So to make this review more interesting, I'm not going to explicitly spoil the game until the very end, but I am going to slowly lead further and further into spoilers and my own experience with the game as time goes on. First with hints and tips before just displaying some confirmed answers near the end. Most of the fun comes from solving the fates and seeing where each chapter takes you, so I'll be spoiling the events of a few chapters early on, but I'm mostly going to highlight the fates I had trouble with, or the more obvious ones. So with all of that said, let's start out with the art style. One thing in particular that makes Obra Dinn stand out is its art style. It's apparently called 1-bit and harkens back to old Mac games. I'm apparently not a fossil, so I've never played anything like it, but I've taken tests with a poorly scanned image of what should be a playground? That's also why I kind of went with a black and white style while playing. It also allows me to key in my own colors if I want to. Regardless of whatever color scheme you choose, the style is distinct and charming, but in a game where we're looking for details like weapons, outfits, and faces, then giving your game a style that's notorious for not being easy to decipher is an odd choice to say the least. The game isn't obviously that lacking in detail, and zooming in on characters shows their faces in the art pieces that are in the book, but it's something I just couldn't get over entirely while I was playing. However, what the game lacks in visual detail, it makes up for in sound. Okay, so I want you to try and picture what an abandoned ship would sound like as you walk through it. Got an idea? How's this? Alright, how about something a little harder now? What do you imagine a sea monster sounding like? Not necessarily a giant one, but one about the size of a person with a slim and maybe sharper design. How is this? Okay, how? How is it this good? This whole game is full of some of the best sound design I've ever heard. It's both odd and also perfect that for a moment, all we have is sound and our imagination to picture what's happened before being dumped right into the moment following it. The reveal to each chapter, seeing a new conflict break out into either a mutiny, an escape, or some other fight was one of the best parts of the game, since that moment before gives us hints as to what's next. Just the audio before the big reveal. Now, one complaint I've seen crop up time and time again is that the music is annoying. I just don't see it. Granted, sometimes it's better to sit in silence and analyze things, which you can do by going back into the book at any point, and it would be great to just have two separate options for both sound and music as opposed to just meshing them into one, but I just can't say I ever found it annoying. I also believe that I give the main theme way too much credit for being as good as it is, but I'm also the kind of guy that listens to video game soundtracks instead of normal people music. So that either makes me completely qualified in my opinion, or lacking any taste in music. I'll leave that one up to you. Now, the voice acting is top notch, though I can't help but feel like the captain of all people felt the least believable. Seriously, listen to this line.
What do you know about these things? About the chest and your dead friends?
I can't be the only one that feels like it could have been maybe a little bit better delivered. Still though, the rest of the cast is completely amazing. A game doesn't need to have good sound design in order for me to keep playing, but a game that compels me to keep playing without listening to something else in the background is a rare thing worth mentioning. So now I guess I should talk about the game part of this game. So if you were to try and put this game in a category, I guess it would technically go under murder mystery like Clue, but the only experience I have with any game like that is the one episode of Minecraft Story Mode that has all the YouTubers in it.
You've got a girl's name.
So point being, this isn't the kind of game I'm used to playing. So my input is of someone who might either be bringing a fresh perspective, or I'm complimenting an idea or system that's practically the norm at this point. Just thought I'd make that clear. So with that said, I want to start out by saying that I'm glad you aren't able to just guess person by person. I'm willing to admit that some identities I just couldn't figure out, and so all I could do was give an educated guess. What I would do is find two characters who I was almost 100% certain in who they were, and then just give an educated guess on which officer the man in uniform was, and try again if I was wrong. I never explicitly went through randomly guessing through every name, apart from a few we'll get to in a bit. But I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly who this guy, or this guy was when I put in the answers. That's not to say that I'm upset that I could cheese the system. To me, it's more a matter of, did I cheat myself out of a complete experience? And I honestly don't believe that I would have felt as good about this game if I was forced to blindly comb back through every detail to find all the answers. If that's your thing though, go for it. The game thankfully also gives details to where you're able to even give a kind of guess like this. For example, the three people all wearing the same outfit are all probably part of the only role that has just 3 members listed. Now for the lower level people such as the top men and the C-men are all mixed in with different outfits. But then there are plenty of places each of them would spend sleeping or socializing to know which is which. Accents in different languages altogether help you figure out which one of the various bearded men are Russians, for example. One thing I completely glossed over every single time while playing this was the glossary, which, admittedly, would have helped me shave an hour or two off of my playthrough. It tells you the roles of the names given on board, as well as the names of a few ship components. Bookmarking was also invaluable, helping me figure out that someone who died here can be seen in the background here. My personal favorite discovery was when looking to see that the surgeon on the ship was the one who assigned us the job of assessing the ship. I know that's probably seen as a given answer, but it made me feel clever once I connected the dots. One thing I thought was interesting was that there isn't an exact fate option for certain events, so you're forced to see where people were last on the Obra Dinn when they disappeared. Another interesting option comes when you're dropped into the Justice at Sea sketch we've been using to identify crew members. Now there is no death by firing squad option, so you have to trace the shot back to who specifically killed the guy. This brings up the idea of the use of a firing squad when only one person gives the final blow. I thought this was interesting, but on the flip side, not every option for a fate is used, which leaves some potential fates up to your imagination. Though one fate goes unused, which I think would have been a topical fate during the 1800s. Cannibalism. When the guy who wrote A Christmas Carol helps make a play on why cannibalism is such an unspeakable crime, then I would have absolutely loved to see the game go down that road, either advocating or condoning such an idea. Maybe a crew member is stranded and starves to death, or maybe a top man goes mad and tries to eat one of the crew members. Granted, the play was written 50 or so years after the Obra Dinn is found, and it's not necessarily to make the game better, and would likely be a reference that 90% of players wouldn't understand, but I just think that more questions like this from this era would have been interesting. How was that for a tangent? I'm sure I'm not the only one to point this out, but as seamless as I found the events in the game to be, it never occurred to me while playing that this was all set up deliberately. What I mean is I never felt the usual jankiness and hand-holding that a linear game can have, and I never felt frustratingly lost like in games that give you no direction. There is a tutorial, but beyond that, the game really only felt forced in progression because I knew I hadn't unlocked parts of the ship yet. The game not only ensures that you're able to follow the events in the game without any confusion, using the door and the pocket watch to signal what's next for the player to do, but Lucas Pope has made a game where about 50 people die, and not once did I feel like it was a stretch. And I feel like that had to do with so many potential fates that are given right off the bat. And so I walked into each new scene excited to see what was next. Even if one was a little too coincidental, it wasn't unreasonable, and it all tells a coherent story as well. I think Lucas Pope himself put it best. To relay a story to the player is kind of tricky, because you can only tell them things when somebody dies. So first off, people have to be dying left and right, and you need a reason for people to be dying constantly. And that's sort of unusual, people don't just generally die all the time. Getting that working with the story in a way that the player can understand took a long time. And I have to say, it was time well spent. As soon as I saw the arrows signifying the difficulty of identifying each person, I figured I'd get about 20 people figured out, and then I'd lose patience with my own inability to finish the game, or the game's inability to guide me down a path of discovery. Instead, I was not only motivated to solve all 60 fates, but I did so in just my 9 hours of playing the game. Now that I've given as much detail of the game as possible, I'm now going to say that this is the point of no return, since now I'm going to be talking about the plot as a whole. I feel at this point you're either here to watch the video, unable to play it yourself and curious what happens, or I have simply not convinced you. To each their own there. So now let's talk about the true voyage of the Obra Dinn. Let me start out by saying this. If you sat me down to watch a movie of the plot of the Obra Dinn's voyage as it unfolds, I get the feeling I wouldn't be interested. No characters truly stick out, and when it's all about everyone dying all the time, then putting it all in a sequence felt satisfying, but when thinking about it after playing, I couldn't help but feel like it was somehow boring. Though, still fairly interesting because of how the game presents it. In summary, a royal family has a chest on board which is guarded day and night by a man who is framed for murder by the second mate and is killed by the firing squad. The man who framed him, along with a few other crew members, then kidnap the rest of the royal family, as well as the chest which we see holding a glowing shell inside, and take the lifeboats out to sea. During their escape, they're attacked by mermaids. Opening the chest burns the mermaids, one of which is shown to have a shell like the one in the chest. With everyone killed apart from the second mate, he dragged the mermaids onto the boat and returned to the Obra Dinn, only to be killed by the second guard that the royal family had with them. The chest and the mermaids are brought on board and are held in the lazarette. Later, cloaked creatures riding crabs raid the ship and are killed, but the crew suffer severe casualties, and the worst is yet to come. A giant kraken then attacks the ship. The captain goes down to the lazarette, does something to fend it off, and after all that's happened, some of the crew begin to escape, while the rest begin to plan a mutiny. Most of the passengers escape, and those who don't are killed by the captain during the mutiny, before the captain takes his own life. The end. My only real problems are the lack of answers given, and the lack of characters. It's all quite an interesting spectacle, but I feel like I'm missing part of the story in regards to the royal family and their purpose for being there, and why they would bring the chest along with them. Still though, uncovering these events in the game rather than in movie form, like I said earlier, magnifies the intrigue. And so the story of the Obra Dinn didn't really need to be this intriguing story in and of itself, but it even has its moments, like when you piece together that the second mate has framed Hook Sang Lao, the guard, for murder. Now the lack of characters may sound ridiculous, since there's 60 of them, but it's more the lack of a focus of a main character, or one that's particularly developed. And that left me with this feeling that something core to the story was missing, and that was any well-developed characters. You spend only a few moments with each individual, and since the context you usually see them in isn't exactly the most social scenario, then the game lacks any particularly strong or notable characters. It doesn't really bring the game down, but it's definitely worth mentioning. So with all that being mentioned, let's wrap this up with the ending. Now, there's a locked chapter in the book that we're given, and it's only accessible after you've solved all other fates. Let me repeat that. You have to solve all other fates before leaving the ship in order to unlock the hidden chapter. I didn't know this, and so when all of a sudden the game decided that I had solved 2 fates and it wanted to tell me this, I figured that the remaining crew members could only be solved in the context of the hidden chapter. Instead, I sat through the quote-unquote bad ending because the game had decided to change its rules up on me just enough to throw me off. I know that the picture wasn't blurry, but neither is Martin Parrott's, and his fate is only present in the hidden chapter. This left me frustrated enough to where I just guessed the other 2 until I got it right. I then went through the exact same paperwork and waited for the mail. We then receive a letter, the book, and a monkey's foot. This takes us into the hidden chapter, and while I was expecting a big twist, I was disappointed with just being given a little more information and the satisfaction of completing the book. In this hidden chapter, we see that the captain killed 2 of the mermaids in order for the Kraken to finally let the Obra Dinn free. While the game shows that we couldn't unlock the chapter, from a logical standpoint, there's no information given that we couldn't have figured out in regards to the overall plot apart from the specific fates. Between the 2 names and the photos we're given, I had already written in names for these guys. This also brought up questions about the surgeon, since he clearly knew about the pocket watch while on the Obra Dinn, and decided to just give it to us for our investigation. Of all the moments in Return of the Obra Dinn, I was disappointed that the ending was truly the weakest link. So, is it worth playing? Even after explaining my feelings on the game and everything I've spoiled? Yes. Well, probably. While Return of the Obra Dinn has a few weak moments here and there, the whole experience left me feeling positive and wanting more. Looking back, I really feel like I had to dig in order to find complaints, as opposed to other games where I'm just looking for something significant to compliment. If the Switch port ever comes to be, then here's hoping for a physical copy. I'd even be down for a sequel. I mean, the Inspector has the pocket watch and shelves full of books. Who knows? This game does lack an iconic nature like Minecraft or Bendy because there's no significant characters or repeated imagery, so I think this game deserves just sharing it where you can, and I'd absolutely love it if Lucas Pope made the book we use in the game into a physical book you can buy. Just saying. So if you're looking for a unique game to play with a good mystery, I can think of no better way to spend your time than as an insurance agent from the early 1800s.